A millionaire brings his young, beautiful mistress to the most exclusive event of the year. He's confident, powerful, and expects to be the envy of everyone in the room. But his entire world is about to shatter into a million pieces. Because across the crowded ballroom, the doors open, and there she is, the wife he left behind. But she's not alone, and she's not crying. She's radiant. And the man on her arm is the one person he never expected to see. This isn't just a story of revenge. It's a story of a woman who was left with nothing but fragments of her old life, and how she picked them up to build something stronger, more beautiful, and utterly real. Before we witness the moment his smile vanishes, make sure you're subscribed to the channel, like this video, and turn on notifications. This helps us bring you more powerful stories of transformation and strength. The crystal chandeliers of the Viridian Ballroom dripped light onto the assembled elite of Crestwood Falls. The air hummed with the soft murmur of money, the clink of fine crystal, and the scent of expensive perfume. At the center of it all was Arthur Vance, a man whose smile was as polished as his Italian leather shoes. His hand rested possessively on the lower back of a woman half his age, Isabella, who glittered in a silver dress that screamed for attention. "Champagne, my dear?" Arthur offered, his voice a smooth baritone that had closed million-dollar deals. Isabella giggled, a high, tinkling sound that grated on the nerves of those nearby. She was beautiful, but hers was a vacant, curated beauty, a trophy he'd recently acquired. "This is so magical, Arthur," she breathed, her eyes wide as she took in the opulence. "It's everything you promised." "Only the best for you," he said, his gaze sweeping the room, not in admiration, but in ownership. He saw colleagues, rivals, sycophants. He acknowledged them with slight nods, a king holding court. This ballroom, this event, it was his natural habitat. He had worked for decades to earn his place here, but his eyes, for a fleeting second, flickered toward the grand entrance, a subconscious habit formed over 20 years of marriage. For 2 decades, his wife, Eleanor, had been on his arm at this very event. Quiet, elegant Eleanor, who preferred books to parties and her garden to gossip columns. He had found her stability boring, her gentle nature a sign of weakness. Leaving her 6 months ago had been, in his mind, an upgrade, trading a reliable sedan for a flashy sports car. Isabella's laughter pierced his thoughts again. "I feel like a princess." Arthur squeezed her waist. "You look like one." But his smile didn't reach his eyes. A tiny, almost imperceptible crack had formed in his armor. Where was Eleanor tonight? He'd expected what? For her to be hiding at home, mourning the loss of her luxurious life? The thought of her alone in that big, empty house had been a dark, secret satisfaction for him. It proved his importance, his irreplaceability. Suddenly, a hush fell over a section of the crowd near the entrance. Heads turned. Whispers, different from the usual social murmur, began to ripple outward. Arthur frowned, his business instincts prickling. A more important CEO? A celebrity? He stood a little taller, ready to be impressed or to compete. Then he saw her. Eleanor. But it wasn't the Eleanor he had left. This woman was a revelation. She wore a deep emerald gown that complemented her auburn hair, which was swept up in an elegant twist. She held herself with a grace and confidence he had never seen. Her smile was easy, genuine, not a performance. She was luminous. And then the world stopped. Arthur's smug confidence evaporated, replaced by a cold, shocking disbelief. His hand dropped from Isabella's back. Because Eleanor was not alone. On her arm, guiding her with a gentle, protective air, was another man. A man Arthur knew all too well. It was Marcus Thorne, his oldest friend, his former business partner, the man he had ruthlessly forced out of their company 5 years ago to seize full control. The champagne flute nearly slipped from Arthur's fingers. The noise of the ballroom faded into a dull roar in his ears. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic, trapped rhythm. This was impossible. This was a betrayal so profound, so public, it stole the air from his lungs. The facade of the powerful millionaire crumbled, revealing the stunned, furious man beneath. The game had just changed, and he was no longer the player. He was the pawn. Old wounds and new strength. 6 months earlier, The silence in the Vance mansion had been deafening. Eleanor sat at her vast, empty kitchen island, the letter from Arthur's lawyer lying before her like a snake. The words were cold, legal, and final. Irreconcilable differences, generous settlement, request for discretion. Discretion. That was a rich word for a man who had already been photographed with his mistress at a resort in Bora Bora. The life she had known for 20 years, a life of charity galas, polished surfaces, and quiet loneliness, had evaporated overnight. She wasn't just losing a husband. She was losing her identity. She was Arthur Vance's wife. Without him, who was she? For weeks, she drifted through the too big house like a ghost. Friends called, their voices dripping with pity. "Oh, Eleanor, we're so sorry." How could he? Their sympathy, while well-intentioned, felt like another layer of confinement. She was now the pathetic, discarded wife. A cliché. The turning point came when she was sorting through the attic, a tomb of their shared past. She found a box of her old things from before her marriage. Sketches, watercolor paintings, business plans for a small artisanal jam company she had dreamed of starting, long abandoned because Arthur deemed it a cute hobby, not a real venture. Beneath the plans was a photograph. It was of her, Arthur, and Marcus Thorne, taken at a company picnic 15 years ago. They were laughing, arms slung around each other's shoulders. She remembered that day. She remembered Marcus, always a thoughtful one, asking about her ideas, really listening when she talked about flavors and local sourcing. Arthur had just clapped Marcus on the back and said, "Focus on the big picture, Marcus. Let the wives handle the preserves." A fire ignited in her belly. It started small, a spark of pure, undiluted anger. She was not a wife to be handled. She was Eleanor. That afternoon, she did something reckless. She found Marcus's number. After the bitter falling out with Arthur, she'd never contacted him. It felt like choosing a side. Now there were no sides. There was only her. His voice on the phone was cautious. "Eleanor, is everything all right?" "No, Marcus," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. "But it will be. Arthur left me, and I need to talk to someone who knows what it's like to be steamrolled by him." They met at a small, quiet cafe, a world away from the Viridian Ballroom. Marcus looked older, wearier, but his eyes were still kind. He listened as she spoke, not just about the divorce, but about her erased dreams, her feeling of becoming invisible. "He never saw your value, Eleanor," Marcus said quietly. "He only sees value in what he can control. He did the same to me. He saw my caution as weakness, my ethics as a liability." "I want to start my company," she confessed, the dream feeling fragile on her lips. "The jam company. It's probably silly." Marcus leaned forward, a fierce light in his eyes. "It's not silly. It's brilliant. And if you'll have me, I'd like to help. Consider it a strategic investment from someone who believes in second acts." Months of frantic, joyful work followed. Eleanor was no longer a ghost. She was a whirlwind. She perfected recipes, sourced organic fruits, designed labels. Marcus, with his sharp business acumen, handled the logistics, the numbers, the strategy. He wasn't a savior. He was a partner. He treated her ideas with respect, her decisions with gravity. One evening, over a sample batch of blackberry lavender jam, an invitation arrived. The annual Crestwood Charity Ball, the event of the year. Eleanor's first instinct was to throw it away. The memory of standing by Arthur's side, smiling until her face ached, was too fresh. Marcus watched her. "You're not going to hide, are you?" "I don't belong there anymore," she whispered. "You belong anywhere you choose to be, Eleanor," he said firmly. "Don't let him exile you from your own life. Go, but go on your terms. Not as his former wife, but as yourself, as the brilliant founder of—" He picked up a jar of jam. "Eleanor's Reserve." He looked at her, a challenge and an offer in his eyes. "And if you need a completely platonic, wildly supportive date to cause a scene with, I have a tuxedo that hasn't seen the light of day in years." Eleanor looked at her friend, at the jar in her hand, and felt a surge of power she hadn't felt in 2 decades. A slow smile spread across her face. It was time to stop hiding. It was time to show Arthur Vance that the woman he left behind was truly gone. In her place was someone he wouldn't even recognize. Back in the Viridian Ballroom, the air was thick with unspoken drama. Arthur Vance stood frozen, his face a pale mask of shock and dawning fury. Isabella, oblivious of the seismic shift, tugged on his arm. "Arthur, what's wrong? You're crushing my hand." He didn't hear her. His entire world had narrowed to the two figures gliding through the crowd with an ease he could no longer muster. Eleanor and Marcus. Together, it was a conspiracy, a personal attack designed to humiliate him in front of everyone who mattered. "I need a drink. A real one," he muttered, finally releasing Isabella's hand and storming toward the bar, leaving her confused and pouting. Across the room, Eleanor's heart was beating a wild, joyful rhythm. The initial surge of anxiety upon entering had melted away the moment she saw Arthur's face, the utter, priceless shock. It wasn't revenge that fueled her now. It was liberation. "You're doing magnificently," Marcus murmured, his hand a steadying presence on her elbow. "I feel magnificent," she replied, and she meant it. She greeted acquaintances not with the timid smile of a wronged wife, but with the confident nod of a business owner. "Lydia, so good to see you. You must try my blackberry lavender jam sometime. I'll have a jar sent to you." The woman was too stunned to do anything but nod. Arthur reached the bar and ordered a double scotch. Neat. He downed half of it in one burning gulp, the liquor doing nothing to quell the fire in his gut. He watched them. He saw Marcus laugh at something Eleanor said, a real, genuine laugh. He saw her touch Marcus's arm in a gesture of easy familiarity. Every glance, every smile between them was a dagger. His mind raced, connecting paranoid dots. Had this been going on for years? Was that why Marcus had been so ethical during their partnership? A ploy to undermine him and steal his wife? The narrative built itself in his head, making him the victim of a long-standing betrayal. Fueled by alcohol and rage, he decided to confront them. He would expose their little charade. He straightened his tie, smoothed his jacket, and marched through the crowd, a force of indignation. He intercepted them near the dance floor, just as the band began a new, soft melody. "Eleanor, Marcus," he said, his voice tight, cutting through the pleasant chatter around them. What a surprising pairing. Eleanor turned to him slowly. Her expression wasn't one of guilt or fear. It was one of calm, almost pitying amusement. "Arthur, you remember Marcus, I assume? How could I forget?" Arthur's smile was a cold, sharp thing. "I see you've moved on. Quite quickly. And with such an interesting choice. Tell me, how long has this been going on? While we were still married, perhaps?" He said it loudly enough for the people nearby to hear. The air crackled with tension. This was the moment he would reclaim control, force them to stumble. But Eleanor didn't flinch. She simply looked at him, and in that look, he saw the complete absence of the fear and deference he was used to. It was unnerving. Marcus stepped slightly forward, not aggressively, but protectively. "You know, Arthur, some of us believe in supporting people, not owning them. Eleanor is an incredible woman with a brilliant mind. Something you'd know if you'd ever bothered to look." Arthur scoffed. "Spare me the sanctimonious act, Thorne. I see what this is. You couldn't beat me in business, so you thought you'd poach my leftovers." The word leftovers hung in the air, ugly and cruel. Eleanor's eyes flashed, but her voice remained dangerously soft. "You see everything as a transaction, don't you, Arthur? A competition. You think Marcus is here for the same reasons you parade your companion around." She glanced briefly at Isabella, who was watching from a distance with wide eyes. "You think this is about you, but it's not. It hasn't been for a long time." She turned to Marcus, ignoring Arthur completely. "Marcus, would you like to dance?" Without a word, Marcus offered his arm. As they turned toward the dance floor, Eleanor paused and looked back at her ex-husband, a man who now seemed small and petty amidst the grandeur. "The business is doing wonderfully, by the way," she said as an afterthought. Eleanor's reserve. "You should try the jam. It's won awards. Something you never managed to do with me." And then they were gone, melting into the other dancers, leaving Arthur standing alone, publicly unmasked and utterly defeated. The whispers around him were no longer of envy, but of pity and scorn. He had tried to wound her, and in doing so, had only revealed his own emptiness for the whole world to see. The ballroom, once a symbol of Arthur's triumph, had become his prison. Every glance felt like a judgment, every whisper a condemnation. He saw the story unfold in the eyes of his peers. Arthur Vance, the cuckolded husband, outmaneuvered and outclassed by his own discarded wife and his former partner. He retreated to a shadowy alcove, pulling a confused and irritated Isabella with him. "We're leaving," he growled, his phone already in hand to text his driver. "Leaving? But we just got here," Isabella whined. "I haven't even seen the dessert bar. Why are we leaving because of your old wife?" "Because this is what they want," he snapped, his composure shattered. "They want a scene. They want to humiliate me. Well, I won't give them the satisfaction." Isabella stared at him, and for the first time, he saw something other than avarice in her eyes. Contempt. She saw the pathetic man behind the money. "The illusion was broken till you're embarrassed," she said, her voice losing its giggly affectation. "She's over there looking like a queen with a nice, normal guy, and you're hiding in a corner like a little boy. This is stupid. I'm getting a drink." She turned on her heel and strode away, leaving him truly alone. Meanwhile, on the dance floor, Eleanor felt a peace she hadn't known was possible. With Marcus's steady lead, they moved easily to the music. "I'm sorry for that," Marcus said softly. "I shouldn't have let him provoke me." "You were perfect," Eleanor said. "You said what needed to be said. And I said what I wanted to say for 20 years. She looked around the beautiful room, at the faces that were now smiling at her with respect instead of pity. He truly believes this is all about him, a calculated move in a game. "And what is it for you?" Marcus asked, his gaze gentle. "Closure," she said without hesitation. "It was a final stitch. I needed to see him, to stand in the same room, and know that he has no power over me anymore, that I am not defined by his rejection." She smiled up at her friend, and it was also a fantastic launch party for Eleanor's reserve. "I've already gotten 3 offers from boutique grocers." Marcus laughed, a warm, rich sound. "That's my CEO." The song ended, and they walked off the floor, heading toward the terrace for some air. They passed Arthur's alcove just as he was emerging, desperate to escape. The 3 of them stood in an awkward triangle for a moment. Arthur looked from Eleanor's radiant, calm face to Marcus's protective stance. The anger had drained from him, leaving behind a hollow, bewildered ache. The script he'd written in his head, of their secret affair, their malicious plot, no longer made sense. What he saw was something far more terrifying, genuine happiness, a connection that had nothing to do with him. He had nothing left to say. No cutting remark, no threat. The weapons he had always relied on, money, power, intimidation, were useless here. Eleanor didn't gloat. She simply looked at him, and in her eyes he saw not hatred, but something worse, profound disinterest. He was a chapter she had finished reading. "Goodbye, Arthur," she said, her tone final. It held no malice, no lingering pain. It was simply a fact. She and Marcus continued on their way, stepping out into the cool night air, leaving Arthur in the stuffy, oppressive warmth of the ballroom. He watched them go, a man standing on the outside looking in, finally understanding the cost of the gilded life he had built. He had traded substance for show, and now he was left with nothing but the echo of his own emptiness. 1 year later, the annual Crestwood Charity Ball was once again the talk of the town. But the buzz wasn't about a powerful millionaire. It was about the success story of the year, Eleanor's reserve, Eleanor Vance, now just Eleanor Thorne, a partnership in business and life that had blossomed naturally from a foundation of deep friendship and mutual respect. Stood at the center of the room, she was no longer on anyone's arm. She was a host at her own table, surrounded by investors, chefs, and local farmers who supplied her thriving business. She wore a simple but stunning crimson dress, her confidence innate, not borrowed. She was telling an animated story about a failed batch of peach habanero jam that had nearly burned down her commercial kitchen, and her guests were roaring with laughter. Across the room, Arthur Vance entered alone. He looked older. The past year had been unkind. The scandal at the ball had ripple effects, Business partners who admired Eleanor's grace and Marcus's integrity found new reasons to distance themselves from Arthur. His relationship with Isabella ended days after the ball. He was still rich, but he was no longer revered. He saw Eleanor laughing, utterly in her element. He saw Marcus beside her, not leading but supporting, his hand resting on the small of her back in a gesture that spoke of quiet pride and partnership. They were a team. There was no anger left in Arthur, only a dull, regretful ache. He had been so blind. He had seen a quiet wife and mistaken her contentment for a lack of ambition. He had seen a cautious partner and mistaken his integrity for weakness. He had been the fragile one all along, building a castle of ego that could be toppled by a single look of pity. He didn't approach them. There was nothing left to say. Instead, he watched as a well-known food critic sought Eleanor out, not for gossip, but to secure an interview for a major magazine feature. He had come tonight hoping to reclaim a shred of his old status. Now he understood that the status he'd valued was meaningless. The real power in this room wasn't in the bank accounts. It was in the genuine connections, the respect earned through passion and integrity, things he long ago traded for superficial trophies. He turned and left the ballroom early, the sound of Eleanor's laughter following him out. It wasn't a taunt. It was simply the sound of a life well lived, a life he had chosen not to be a part of. Outside, the night air was cool and clean. Eleanor and Marcus had also slipped away from the festivities, finding a quiet moment on the same terrace as the year before. "Another successful ball," Marcus said, handing her a glass of sparkling water. "It feels different this time," Eleanor said, leaning against a railing and looking up at the stars. "Last year was about closure. This year, this is just my life, and it's a good one. The best," Marcus agreed. She looked at him. This man who had seen her at her most broken and hadn't looked away. This man who had believed in her dream before she fully believed in it herself. Their relationship had been a slow, steady burn, built on a foundation of friendship that proved to be unshakable. "It wasn't about proving anything to him, was it?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. "It was about proving it to you," Marcus said, taking her hand. "And you did, spectacularly." Back inside, the band struck up a new song. The party continued, a whirl of light and sound. But for Eleanor and Marcus, the most meaningful moment was a quiet one they shared away from it all. They had built something real from the fragments of their old lives, a partnership, a business, a love that was stronger than any gilded facade could ever be. The story of the millionaire and his mistress was old gossip, long forgotten. The story that inspired everyone now was the one about the resilient woman who lost everything and found her true self and the love she truly deserved in the process. Her transformation was complete. She was finally and utterly herself.